So I would like to welcome everybody to the Tuesday, May 12th, 2020, Glynn County Joint Planning Commission Special Called Work Session. In an effort to adhere to the guidelines set forth by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention for the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held via video teleconference. The public has simultaneous access to this meeting. The meeting will be streamed online for public viewing through Glynn County Board of Commissioners Facebook and YouTube pages. Commissioners, remember to please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Staff will control the PowerPoint presentation. Please do not scroll or control the slides on the screen during the presentation. Before we get started tonight, we're going to do a roll call of the planning commissioners. So what I will do is I will call your name. Please repeat your name and say present. Commissioner Gibbs from the Mainland Planning Commission.
Sherry Gibbs, present.
Commissioner Lee.
Gene Lee, present.
Commissioner Neville.
Gary Neville, present.
Commissioner New.
Missy New, present.
Commissioner Strickland. Commissioner Strickland.
Commissioner Strickland, present.
I knew you were there. Commissioner Williams, not present. And Commissioner Edgy, present. Islands Planning Commission, Commissioner Kate.
Carla Kate, present.
Commissioner DiPolito.
Yes.
Commissioner DiPolito.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner DiPolito said that she has some technical issues. She's on, but she can't hear us, so she's working on that.
Okay. Commissioner Duncan. Commissioner Ragsdale.
George Ragsdale, present.
Commissioner Rooks.
Odessa Woods, present.
Commissioner Torres.
Michael Torres, present.
And Commission Chairman Joel Willis.
Joel Willis, present.
Okay. From staff, Secretary Janet Loving.
Janet Loving, present.
Pam Thompson. Okay.
Ms. Thompson is not present.
Okay. Stephanie Leaf.
Stephanie Leaf, present.
Maurice Postal.
Is
Mr. Postal present?
No, sir.
Okay. And then from our consultants, we have Woody Giles.
Yes, Woody Giles, present from TSW.
Okay. And then we have Caleb, and you're going to forgive me, Caleb. Caleb, how do you pronounce your last name?
Rassicoat.
Rassico. Okay.
Sorry about that. Had the mute on, yeah, Rossico.
Okay, perfect. And you're present. Okay. So we have consultants from TSW that are present that are going to be going through the potential policy solutions to address the questions raised for Envision Glynn diagnostic report. The way I understand it from email exchanges with Ms. Leaf, we're not going to discuss each and every point in detail and specifics, but commissioners, if you have questions regarding a point that you would like to have answered during the question and discussion period, please note that and we'll come back to it and we'll give the consultants an opportunity to address those issues, okay? So at this point, Mr. Giles.
All right, thanks again for coming together for this special call meeting. And I have to admit, I can't see anyone. I can either see the slides or the video. So if anyone's trying to signal to me, then Stephanie can send me a text or let me know if there's any audio or video trouble. But Appreciate everybody being here tonight. And basically, there's two things we want to share. One was just an update. It's been a few months since we were before you and before the public related to the zoning update. So just kind of wanted to share where we are, and then spend most of our time, as you mentioned, going through the draft policy solutions and talking about those to make sure they are ready for the public. So I will jump in with our sort of introduction to where we've been. And I think everyone is aware this is a Planning Commission meeting, so would love to take any and all questions from the planning commissioners, and I'll wait until the end of my slides for Q&A, and then once we get into the document, we can kind of break every now and then for Q&A. But if any members of the public are watching today and have questions or comments, you can submit those to zoningupdate@glenncounty-ga.gov, which is the address we've been using for this process. So we'd love to hear public comments and questions as well. So just a quick summary of sort of where we've been. Our last public engagement was back in the fall, which seems like a world away considering how things are today. But we had some engagement at First Friday and Coast Fest, and then we had a detailed community workshop. We had more than 300 people over the course of the weekend that were able to engage both on the islands and the mainland. So that was fantastic. Got a lot of great input, and then we put some of the same questions in an online survey that we got more than 500 responses to, so also fantastic. So all of that was around the policy questions and really the questions we knew that needed to be asked before we could update the zoning ordinance. So we got confirmation on all of those questions from the public. But our experience from having worked with a lot of communities on zoning has been that it's good to officially confirm those with the county commission before we move forward. And that's just to make sure that everyone understands what we're looking at. We're obviously not at the place of draft regulations or actual ideas yet, but wanted to make sure that the commission was willing for us to continue talking about all of these. So we took all of the policy questions, which I should say come out of the diagnostic report verbatim. And if you want to take a look at that, it's on the county's website. On the zoning update page, you can download and look at that. But we presented those to the county commission in November, and then created a survey just for the commissioners to respond to each of those questions, and basically said, is this something we should keep on the table or not? And we got the responses for that in February and presented that again to the commissioners then. So I will say that because of the delay, that was important for us to confirm with the commissioners, and we got what we needed, and I'll talk about sort of what's on the table and what's not. But because of that timeline, our general timeline, which has us moving from charting a course, sort of where we are now, into the actual draft changes, which will start later this year, has been adjusted a little bit. So you'll see, if you remember the slide from our last meeting, these months have been bumped forward a couple of months. That's a combination of us confirming with the commissioners, and obviously for the past couple of months we've been waiting to see what was going on with the pandemic. And I think at this point we're ready to move forward in virtual or other ways, and we can talk about next steps at the end. But that means that our timeline, which we originally thought was going to be able to wrap up this year, will extend considerably into next year. So depending on how the drafting process goes and what else we hear from the public and you and the commission, we're hoping to be done by next summer.
Woody, it's George Ragsdale. Let me interrupt you before you go on. You made reference to that work session where you shared the results of the survey that you took with the commissioners. I understand that the results that were shared in that meeting were not accurate and have been redone. I have not seen those corrected results published. When can we see what the results of that survey were in its corrected form?
Yeah, good question. So this, a great transition to this slide. So That's correct. The survey results were misrepresented to the county commission based on just a tabulation error of who had said we wanted to continue discussion on certain items versus not. The survey that we sent to the commissioners was the same policy questions, and the question was, do you want to continue the conversation? And then the only three that, based on the updated results, they said, you know, that should really be off the table. We don't need to discuss it, are the three that you see here. So changes to the height limit on St. Simon's Island, which means they're saying we don't need to talk about changing any height limits on St. Simon's Island as a part of this process. Planning Commission approval of taller chimneys, flagpoles, et cetera. It's something that you will already approve, and the commission said that's fine, that can continue to be the case. It's really a more technical thing. And then expansion of the Planning Commission authority, which was a broader item that that we had heard, and they said that's not something that needs discussion. So if you need the tabulation or the spreadsheet, that may be something that Stephanie Leaf can provide, but the summary is that we got basically a green light to continue talking about everything except those three questions.
Thank you.
So those were the policy questions, and what we're here this evening to discuss are the draft policy solutions. And what these really are draft potential solutions for each of the policy questions in the diagnostic report. And I can't emphasize enough that these really are potential solutions. Our thought process at TSW and talking with county staff was really to make sure that all of the good options were on the table, and we looked at other communities that we've worked with and best practices nationwide, and wanted to make sure that we had a good list of options for you to choose from. But it may be in the end that you decide to do some of those options or all of those options or none of those options. So they're really just items for discussion, and every policy solution is going to need a lot more discussion with this group, with the county commission, with the public, and TSW will also have more homework to do in terms of drafting regulations and researching how these could work and making sure that we not only have the best ideas, but understand exactly how they apply and how we need to tweak them to be the best fit for Glynn County and different places within Glynn County, because we know there's a lot of differences between the islands and the mainland, and even on a smaller grain, we're going to need solutions that apply at those levels. So really, our goal today is to make sure that all the right ideas are on the table. And if there's any solutions that are just not good ideas or not at all appropriate for Glynn County, we can take those off. And then also any edits, whether that's changing an idea or just tweaking the wording before we take things to the public. So just to emphasize tonight, there's no way we could talk about all of these solutions and whether they are good ideas, bad ideas, how they would be implemented, what the regulations would actually say. Our question tonight is just, is this an idea that's worth further consideration by this group and the public? So we can jump into the document, and I'll also say, I think our discussion tonight will be flexible. And I know there was some concern about getting through everything, so we'll do our best and see how far we can get. But TSW is not trying to push this process. So however the conversation needs to go tonight and sort of what the next couple of months look like are flexible. So I think that let me just mention before we dive into the document, just in terms of what's next. Once we have confirmation from the Planning Commission that those are the right solutions, and we consider the Planning Commission's our sort of steering committee. So that's why we're coming to you tonight to ask these. We will present the same solutions or the amended version of them based on what we hear today to the public at an open house, and this will allow the public to review each of those. We'll tonight everything is sort of black and white in text, and we'll probably provide some other information or case studies or photos or graphics just to make them a little easier to understand, because tonight may be pretty technical, but we'll have an open house. We don't know what that will look like yet. I think everyone's still trying to figure out what the world is going to look like in a month or two. That may be totally online. It may be a mix of online or in person. we'll have to figure that out, and we'd love to schedule that in June or July. But again, we can push that out if we need to. And again, that's the email address if anyone's joined us and wants to share any comments tonight about anything I've presented or anything we're going to talk about. That's the address. So any questions about any sort of what we've been up to, or generally the policy solutions or anything I've talked about?
Woody, it's George Ragsdale again. At some point, will you finalize that diagnostic report and issue it in something other than draft form?
Yes. Oh, the diagnostic report. I thought you meant the policy questions. The diagnostic report is really just a tool for our team to identify what needs to be talked about. And so what we are ultimately talking about evolves throughout this process and will evolve tonight. And so we don't typically go back and tweak that report or reissue it, because it's really served its purpose at this point to identify those things. If there are new things that come to light, new policy questions, something else that needs to go off the table, even though we didn't realize that yet, or new information or a new commissioner decision, then the what's behind there can change. But we don't usually reissue sort of revised drafts.
I wasn't suggesting it be revised. I just think at some point it ought to be issued in final form. It could always be amended if it had to be, but issuing it in draft form implies that there's going to be changes in it, and as you just said, that's not the intent.
Well, I think there will be. I mean, I don't know that we'll get into that document and make a bunch of changes, but in terms of what we're talking about, there will be changes to that throughout the process.
Okay.
Woody, I would like to add one thing. Good evening, commissioners. Woody did not mention, but I think it goes without saying, that if we have left off any potential solutions that you would like us to look at, obviously everything is on the table from our perspective at this point. So please feel free to let us know if we haven't been exhaustive enough. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Caleb. Any other questions from anyone? All right, then I will see if I can shift screens here to pull up the diagnostic report. It's going to let me do this. I'm sorry, the policy solutions. We're talking about the diagnostic report, but these are the policy solutions. All right, can everyone still see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Then what I think makes most sense is again, I'll provide a little sort of introduction, and each of these, you'll see number one here, each of these is in response to one of the policy questions. So they're sort of one-to-one questions and solutions, of course, with the exception of the ones that are off the table. So trying to keep things pretty consistent with the diagnostic report. I don't think we need to go through item by item, although I may walk through a couple of them just so that we can talk about some of the key ones and some of the ideas behind them, but we may go kind of section by section or page by page, and then pause and see if there are comments or questions about those groups of numbers, if that sounds good to everyone. So I mentioned again, these are initial draft solutions, and these came from TSW's expertise, best practices from other communities, ideas that we heard at public meetings and interviews, and we're here to discuss them first with you, but of course with the public and the county commission before anything gets to actual draft regulations. Any one of these potential solutions may work. All of them may work for a given idea, or one of them may rise to the top, and we may find something we haven't thought about at all yet, as Caleb mentioned. And this, I will say, is just the policy questions. If you've seen the diagnostic report, you know that there's all of the technical questions there. Those are generally pretty straightforward answers because they're just the mechanics of the zoning ordinance. And so they're not something that we need a lot of input on, but those are still on our list, and those still will be shared with the public once we have draft changes. So those stay tuned for answers to the technical questions. So I'll go through briefly number one, just so you can kind of see how these are structured. So number one, again, this is the same as the policy question. It's about how maximum building height is measured, which is measured either from flood level or ground level, whichever is higher to the highest point of the roof. We heard that there's some confusion about that, and we need to think about both clarifying that from a technical standpoint and also the effect that it has on building height and flood elevation and all of those things. So solution A is update the definition of building height so that it's measured only from ground level. Solution B is doing the same thing, but also updating some other things about the code so that we're thinking about building bulk, sort of the size and volume of buildings in addition to just height. Potential solution C is based on how you measure sloped roofs. D would be measuring from ground level before any grading happens. And so I think you'll see not all of those are exclusive. You could pick more than one of those options or a different version of each of them. And then option E is no change. And you'll see that on, I think, almost all of these, that one option is that we decide to not make any changes to that particular aspect of the zoning and just keep it the way it is. So so again, for these tonight, there's a lot that we could debate the merits of sort of how these work. And I will say the Planning Commission has this document, and I know a couple of commissioners provided some detailed responses, and that's fantastic. And we will need that response from everyone, and including the public. And we will put this, what's on screen right now will go up on the county's website soon, so the public will also be able to comment on it. So a lot we could talk about here. And again, we'll have some graphics because I know some of this is hard to envision in terms of the height measurement. But when we get to the public open house, we'll have some graphics that'll make it a little simpler. But our goal tonight is just to say, are these the right, here's a question about building height. Are these the right solutions? Anything we need to add to this list, remove to this list, or change? So any thoughts then about number one, or any questions?
Woody, this is Missy New. So when you're referencing BFE, are you including the base flood elevation plus the freeboarding requirement? Because if that's not what I think that should be an option, that the height measurement, if we're going to require folks to freeboard above the base flood elevation, then an option should be to be considered would be that it would be measured from the base flood elevation plus the freeboarding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important clarification. And it gets in a little bit to number two in terms of what is, how far above base elevation are you required to build? But maybe we want to either add a solution to one or clarify that. So yeah, thank you. Good point.
Well, this is Patrick. I agree with Missy's point. One issue is building height. The other issue is flood. And we shouldn't confuse the two, right? So, I don't think we should change it. I think measuring from the base flood should remain.
Yeah, and these are really, the reason this is on here is exactly what you're saying. It's not clear today. It's a little confusing, but one option is that we, focus on number two, and one of the solutions there solves the problem, and the solution to number one is no change. But again, I think at this point, what is the right solution, or how does that work, is something we want to talk about with the public and sort of a bigger conversation. So as long as we have the right options on the table for people to consider, then we can continue to talk about that.
Well, on number two, you mentioned increasing the freeboard to 2 feet. I don't know where that came from or what that accomplishes. We already get the best insurance rate, having already increased it by 1 foot. So why are we trying to take it up another foot?
That's a good question, and a great point. Something that we're actually going to focus on in our informational materials at the workshop is how does this relate to flood insurance rates? There are federal standards, and each community earns a certain number of points for a lot of things, but a lot of the points are actually related to regulations, zoning and building regulations. And there are actually a lot of opportunities in this zoning update to get more points and move Glynn County into the next category, which would reduce flood insurance rates, and requiring buildings to be more than 1 feet above base flood elevation is actually one of those things. Some of them are not straightforward. You do this and get a point. It's more subtle than that, but we included that because we heard conversations about whether that should be higher, base flood elevation should be higher at the beginning, but also because it's an opportunity for people to save on flood insurance.
Well, I understand that, but and I don't know the full story about more points for different freeboard levels, but we have to keep in mind for every foot of elevation we add, that's a step and a half we're asking our residents to walk up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely compromises to each of these, and you'll see, so it's 1 foot today. Option potential solution A is 2 feet. Potential solution B is 3 feet, which we put in there to kind of have different levels. But we'd love to hear from the other commissioners if it's appropriate to take that away. Solution B, because that's too much, or if it just comes down to kind of how we explain this to the public and making sure they understand the pros and cons.
Well, I'll just say one last point. 3 feet is incredibly crazy.
Woody, it's George. Part of the problem with the way some of these were presented is, I agree with Patrick to the extent that there doesn't really need to be any change in what's there now of 1 foot. But with respect to the solutions you presented, there are other things that were offered as solutions that I think need to be incorporated in the solution. So saying no change doesn't pick up those other things that ought to be incorporated. I also agree with what Patrick said in the beginning, that to me, flood and building height are two different things, which to me says that we need to think about number one and number two differently. I think building height ought to be measured from grade. I think flood requirements should be measured from the base flood level, which is not the way it is now.
Mm-hmm.
So Woody, this is Missy. So George, I just want to share with you kind of my real world experience with this issue. I think if you measure from the ground, the people that are building homes that maybe with the freeboarding and the flood zone, they're having to build, let's say, 3 feet off the ground or 4 feet off the ground. If you make them measure their building height from the ground, then there is a really good chance that they're not going to build it up 8 or 9 feet. And I think everybody would agree, flood-wise, there's an advantage there. They put their garage underneath. Hopefully, they have less of a footprint, more places for water to go. But if you measure their height from the ground, you're going to have a big unintended consequence. On those houses that are having to be built up 3 or 4 feet, they're not going to go 8 feet and put their garages underneath because they're going to lose a story. And so then their house is going to take up more of the lot, and they're going to be more likely to flood because you made them in an area where they had to build up 3 or 4 feet, make it a non-decision to build up even more and put your garage underneath because they're going to lose a story.
It's a good point, Missy.
Yeah.
This is Joel Willis. I agree with Missy on that. I built my house that way, and just by doing that, you just you don't take up all your site. So that just helps with storm runoff if you're not adding a separate garage.
Yeah, and I could see us making a graphic there that maybe showed how that works, just a real simple graphic that shows the flood level and the house on stilts or whatever, and kind of makes that clear.
Well, just in general, Woody, this is a pretty technical issue. A graphic will definitely help, but some of these solution choices have some unintended consequences. And again, I think we need to be very careful, separate building height from flood level. We already, as it's mentioned, we have number of story limitations that we're allowed to build. And we should just leave it at that. And not worry about the building height. On one more point, the solution mentioned on number 2 about not being able to change the grade in order to meet base flood element. That's not a good rule. If you're in a situation where you're only 1 foot below flood, adding a foot of dirt is not going to do any harm. And so there are a lot of nuances to these solutions that I don't think are intended.
Patrick, unless that 1 foot of added, this is Gene Lee, unless that 1 foot of added fill allows the water drain off to drain to adjacent lots.
Yeah, but we have rules. I agree with that, but we have rules regulating water runoff. Okay?
Okay.
So raise your house, but guess what? You got to control your runoff.
So specifically on C, that's actually a state requirement that's in the state model ordinance. We have pond engineers on our team who are not on the call tonight, but they confirmed that. So that's where that bullet came from. So I don't believe that's something that we can change.
What? Can't change what?
The fact that fill dirt cannot be used to increase site elevation to meet BFE. I think the reason we decided to say confirm that is that there was some lack of clarity over that today, but my understanding is that that is how the state model ordinance is written.
Well, I don't know what's written in the state, but we do it here. When you bring in fill dirt, you ultimately need to get a survey certification of what your elevation is. Okay. So you in effect have raised it at some level. All right. And at times it could be to meet that minimum standard.
Woody, commissioners, this is Gary Neville, Mainland Planning Commission. I'm also a land surveyor and we do elevation certs. And the only area I know where they're not allowed to add dirt to raise the elevation is what was in what they call the velocity zone. You're allowed to have enough dirt just to level the lot, and that was it. But because the runoff was an issue, but that's the only place that I know where they had no fill.
Right, and Gary, right now in Riverside, there's a house that just finished that they brought in. They brought the whole lot up to the BFE plus the freeboarding, which was probably, I don't know, Hayden Jurgen's house probably 4 feet. I mean, they're definitely doing it.
It's a place to go during hurricane season.
Yeah, that's where I'm parking my car.
We probably started this session with the 2 toughest issues.
Yeah, these are definitely tricky issues, and so again, trying to our job tonight is not to work through these at all, but just to decide what needs to stay on the table. And so if number 2 solution C is obviously something we need to look in a little bit more, but one option is it's just too technical for the public, and we need to sort of figure that out with the county engineers and our engineers, clarify so that whatever we decide is easy to understand in the code, but we don't need to ask, or maybe just leave it in and explain it well to the public. And then the same question on number 1 in terms of building height and flood elevation. The way it's written now, that's a question where I understand they're tied together now and it's confusing, but the way it's written, we're asking the public if we should change that. And if the Planning Commission would like to sort of take that off the table and say, we're changing it, it's not something we need to talk about, then that's an option and we can amend the solutions.
I think this Gene Lee, I don't think that should be a public comment question. That's whether it's meets the ordinance and meets state guidelines or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I would be curious to know whether it applies to all flood zones or just the velocity zones.
Yeah, I can look at the email. We had some correspondence with Pond about that, so I can pull up those emails and share those.
Woody, I'm sorry if I'm hogging the time. Just one quick clarification on point number one. You don't really talk about building height itself. You talk about issues that impact building height, but I think a lot of the concern on the islands, at least, is the actual building height. And we have two building heights over here, one for resort residential and the village, and resort residential and then rest, right? I think that's probably a concern, is about the absolute height, not necessarily how do you get there.
Right, and that's the item commissioners took off the table is whether changing any of the height limits on St. Simons would be a part of this process. So that's a question we heard about, and the commissioner said those will stay as they are.
Right. Okay. Well, then trying to monkey with the heights based on tweaking how we measure it, adding freeboard and all of that, I think that is trying to do the same thing, but in a technical way.
That's not the intent. I think the intent is just to clarify these and make sure we have the right regulations and not, game this so that everybody gets an extra story, but just figure out how they should be measured and calculated.
Or we shouldn't game it so that it reduces a story either.
Right, and I don't mean, clearly both 1 and 2 have consequences for how tall buildings are, and we can't avoid that. But the goal is not to find a backdoor to make buildings shorter or taller. It's just to fix the problem at hand.
Okay. Thank you.
So we'll take out 2C. Anything on 1 that we need to add or remove or edit? All right, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but I know there's a lot here, a lot of technical stuff, and I don't know how much time everyone has to read through this. So we will give you time, once I go to the next page is not your last chance to comment. If something occurs to you later in the meeting, or we need to take comments by email, we'll figure out how to get all of the planning commissioners' comments. 3 is pretty simple, just making sure that telecommunication height regulations are consistent with FAA standards. 4 is one of the other bigger questions and something we talked a lot about at the public engagement back in the fall, and those are design standards, which could relate to site design, architectural design, landscaping, and there are a few pieces of that in your code today, but basically, solution A is taking basic design requirements and having those countywide. Solution B is basic requirements that would only apply in certain areas. C is things that are maybe a little more detailed or look at the architecture. Again, those could apply countywide or in certain areas. D is looking at form-based zoning, which can have design aspects, but can also be higher level, and E is no change. These are not mutually exclusive, and there's a lot of subtleties to discuss here, but we were trying to craft these to maybe think of all the potential options, both for how much design, how strict design you wanted and where it might apply. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can tweak these.
So do you want feedback? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
So, on number 4, I have a big issue, one, for those being countywide and trying to create something that would be countywide. I think our, housing stock and housing needs are vastly different. I would generally have issue with all the facade and colors and textures and all that. I don't know that a governmental entity should be in charge of deciding the current wants and needs of the consumer. In terms of that, they have nothing to do with safety or really quality of life. It's very subjective. But I do think, one thing that y'all committed to do and the county committed to do is when you're suggesting things, that part of the conversation is what is the impact on the affordability of housing, and what kind of costs do these things add? I think of lots of first-time home buyers that I sold them house that they there was some landscaping put in to satisfy a lender, but they put in sweat equity and put in their landscaping after the building permit, after the CO, and that was part of their plan and ability to buy a house. So I have an issue with some standard landscape plan that's across the county, but also I think anytime we're proposing these, we have an obligation to talk about what's the additional cost, because everything sounds good if you're not thinking about that. So I don't know what would be the norm for you to go through and really provide some information on what kind of cost this adds to the construction process, or make a statement that says this, realizing this will add cost to the cost of housing and remodeling and updating and all of those things to homes, because that's a big, y'all somewhere in here say we have plenty of affordable housing, which is not correct. It's a big issue in our county.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of building is already, very, very, unaffordable to most of our regular working class folks.
Yeah, and that's a serious problem, and construction costs are continuing to go up and way more than inflation. So that's not anything that's going to be solved anytime early. So just a couple of thoughts. Would love to hear from other commissioners on that. But one way we could do this would be to present these options as sort of a scale. One of the challenges when we show photos at the public meeting is sometimes says, oh, everyone will say, we love that house, the one with the nice brick and the trees. But the question is really, that's a very nice house. Should that be required? And what are the cons of that? If that house is less affordable, or there's less architectural creativity and everything starts to look the same, or there's unintended consequences, someone was saying earlier. So one option would be to say, here's a spectrum, here's more strict regulations, here's loose regulations, and sort of pros and cons of each of those. And maybe those are different questions on the islands versus the mainland, or even specific areas. And the other option, because what I hear you saying is all about housing, would just be to say, if residential design guidelines are not appropriate anywhere in the county, that's not a question we even want to ask. We could focus on non-residential, and again, maybe that's certain areas, that's I-95 corridor or something, or focusing just on hotels or just on restaurants, or whatever it is. But we could just focus that wherever it made sense.
This is Gene Lee. I kind of agree with Missy. If you're going to outline restrictions or guidelines for residential areas, let's say for facades or windows or materials for Sterling, versus similar to what you might have in the village of the island, I think we're increasing the construction and cost so much that people just it would be difficult and unnecessary.
Wow.
This is Commissioner Edgy. I agree with what Missy and Gene just said. There's already enough infringement from homeowners associations on what you can and can't do. I don't think the county needs to get involved in that. to this point, anyway.
This is Carl. I do think different issues on the island when it comes to residential zoning. I do believe that there are certain districts that we put more control.
This is Sherry Gibbs, and I want to say that I agree with what the three previous commissioners had to say. This looks like you're trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all approach, and I agree with what Commissioner Edgy said. This usually goes back to a subdivision level and a subdivision requirement. You know, you might consider it, you know, more in a commercial range, or what you have, you know, with what has to do with commercial and, you know, in a location. But I think this is overreach.
Okay. So it sounds like there's some pretty good consensus that maybe solution A just goes away, which doesn't mean the idea of design standards goes away, because B still has that in there, but it's more certain areas on the islands, non-residential development, and we can figure out what that looks like. But is that what I'm hearing right, that maybe we need to just drop solution A for now?
Commissioner Edgy, again, in my opinion, that is true. Now, the only place that this may have a need to be considered, and I would defer to the Islands Planning Commission commissioners, but maybe in the village, where there are some design standards that need to be upheld. But countywide, I think this is a bad idea.
And this is Stephanie. Yeah, thank you, Chairman, for that segue. I think what I wanted to kind of ask you all, you know, for potential solution B, you know, we look at, you know, our gateway areas when you're coming off of our exits. You know, this is kind of the face of our community. You know, sometimes people will make comments about, you know, we're allowing metal buildings there. You know, we're not having any architectural design standards. You know, so this would be an opportunity that if there are, you know, and it sounds like, you know, maybe there is some consensus for very specific areas. You know, this would be one of the questions, like on the mainland, you know, would this be a specific area for commercial only that you might have some different standards? And then also, of course, on St. Simon's in the Village, we already do have some standards, but should we look at, you know, increasing those, expanding those even further than what we already have?
This is Joel Willis. I agree with this. I think the mainland commission needs to deal with those items on the mainland, those areas, and the island can deal with basically the village. But Woody, you know, we're on number 4, and we've been in this thing almost 50 minutes. Can I make a recommendation that each commissioner go through this and study it and do what George did? George did a great job going through each of those 50 items or 49 items, and you know, stated what his opinion was, or had questions about it if he wasn't sure about it. Can't we do that and send those to you and Stephanie, and y'all can compile those? And so somehow we might have a consensus on some of them. Some of them we won't, some of them we won't understand. But I don't see how we can continue doing this and clearly understand it in a session like this. So that's just my recommendation, that we kind of take George's lead and see where we stand on some of these things. And we may not understand it, which I'm surely, you know, there's confusion on the first 2. And we just need to get clear on that. So I kind of want to help kind of move this process along.
And to Joel, this is Commissioner Kate, to add to that, Wills, you know, we're all going to look at, we're going to focus on different elements. You know, some of us are going to be more proficient in certain, you know, certain policies than others. And so we're all, which is what makes it so great, is that we're all looking at different things, specifically different eyes. So it's a good point, Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have everyone sort of go through this line by line, and and provide comments, and we can make it as far as we can today until we are all worn out from being on video meetings or reach the end of our time. But I would again emphasize that we're not yet ready for your preferences on these in terms of, I think, I like solution C, or solution C is the right one. We're interested in solution C needs to be taken off the table. It shouldn't be a part of the conversation, or we need to tweak solution C or whatever it is. So in terms of what you think is appropriate or all of that, we need that, but we'll need that in the summer. So right now, the question is just, are these the right solutions to be putting out there?
Well, why don't we just have everybody do that? Take
Yeah,
this,
that'd be
take
fantastic.
A out, take B out, take C out, whatever it is. Help compile it, get in kind of, I'm sure once all this is done, there's going to be some discussion on each item. So, and more definition or more discussion about it. So,
yep.
I don't think we can get to that going through this tonight like this. And I would say let's have a date certain when everybody has to turn this in, where we don't prolong it.
Yeah, that would be great. Are you proposing that we adjourn for tonight to give everyone more time to look at this and find another time for the meeting, or should we sort of make the best use of the time we've got?
I'd make the best use of this time. I'm not sure how long we want to go, but I don't think we can solve all this tonight.
I think we're starting with some of the harder ones, so I think this is going to move faster as we go along. And yeah, well, if we don't make it through tonight, I don't want to force, no one's going to be here till midnight, and I don't want to force
Right.
getting through these if we don't need to.
Okay, let's go.
So any other thoughts on number 4? We'll remove A and maybe sort of look at the wording on B to what Stephanie was saying. But any other edits here?
Commissioner Kate, perhaps also we should identify the numbers that need to be separated from the mainland and the island. I do think 4 1.
I'm not sure I caught all of that, but I heard something about the separation between mainlands and the island, and we definitely would think about those independently just because the needs are different there, and maybe even smaller areas, within the mainland, thinking about I-95 different than the rest of the area, or, the village different than the rest of the island or something.
Right. I'm just saying that, we do have different needs. So I think that's one where the mainland planning commission will come back with different thoughts than we do on number 4.
Right. Yeah. I think, and that's the beauty of having both commissions, and I think we're looking to you for that is understanding. And this one's very explicit in terms of different, but some of the others just what are the consequences for your area, so we can make sure we get that right.
This is Ms. New. I have a question. So all of the examples, would they apply to new construction as well as significant remodels?
We'd have to decide. I think at this point we're just trying to see if there's appetite for these for the public, and then we'd have to decide what are the actual regulations and when would they apply.
I would just make that clear when we ask the public question, because I think a lot of times the mentality is, well, that doesn't apply to me. I already have my house. I'm not worried about that. Yet then, they have to do a major remodel because they want to, or because they have to because of something, and it does apply to them. I think question needs to provide some clarity that it could include remodeling as well as new construction, because lots of other things in the code would obviously apply to remodeling as well.
Yeah.
And typically in communities that do this, it really is only new construction. It would be very unlikely that the county would ever adopt ordinances that retroactively applied and may actually conflict with homeowner subdivision HOA requirements. So, good point.
Okay. Number 5 is open space is not currently required for new developments. That doesn't mean you can pave your whole lot because of course there are buffer and setback requirements, but option A is requiring new developments to set aside a certain amount of open space. Option B is the same as A, but maybe providing an incentive to preserve some of the spaces that we've heard are important, whether those are, you know, natural spaces or something else of extra value. Option C could be exempting certain areas. Maybe you're across the street from a park or in the village where there's not a lot of room for open space. And D would be no change. And then our footnote here is that the county's thinking about impact fees, which relate to actually a lot of what we're talking about, housing affordability and open space and many things. So we'll have to coordinate these solutions and several of the others with the results of that discussion.
Woody, Gary Neville, Mainland Planning Commission. It's probably about at least 25 years ago, there was a requirement when you did a subdivision where you had to reserve a park area, and developers took the county to task on that and had it removed. Basically, they considered it sort of a blackmail. They had to give property if they wanted to get approved. It was taken out, and I like the idea of open space, but I think it ought to be incentivized, basically reduced rates, or there may be something else that a developer could do to, provide a park for your development or for the rest of the public, and the county in turn does something else for them as far as their development goes.
Yeah, Caleb, I may ask you to speak to the sort of requiring public parks because that can get tricky in terms of legal requirements.
I don't know. Well, Woody, when we were in the comprehensive planning session, we talked about this. And part of the issue was, the way I understood it, it wouldn't be a public park, it would be a subdivision park. So then you're making every subdivision have a HOA. And I haven't, we talked about that's a huge affordability issue again. And it's a long-term cost for an amenity that people are having to pay extra for when they buy their house or their lot, and then they're having to pay extra for it every year because someone, in their neighborhood thought it was that doesn't live in their neighborhood, us, decided that everybody should have a park. And I just don't think we want to set a situation where every neighborhood or development has to have a HOA.
Yeah, and we were very intentional. The way we phrased this as open space rather than park was trying to say that's not what we're going for, because it could be, if there's some nice woods on the property, and you could put the houses in the other part of the property and leave that as open space. Either, maybe it's even marshy and it's not, no one's ever going to go take a walk there or play baseball, but it's still preserved open space. Or maybe it is an amenity, but it's not, it doesn't require maintenance or anything. And just to the public park question, there are issues requiring developments to create public parks or parks that have to be open to the public or something. Can get tricky. So I suspect if that's the case, that's why that was taken out of the code. But just to require a certain percentage of the property to be open space, whether that is, on individual parcels or a common parcel or, the marsh or whatever it is something that you can require. The incentive question is a good one, and that actually may apply to a lot of these things. What are things that are either so important we want to require them or are easier to require, and what are other things that we could do incentivize? And in those cases, what's appropriate? Developers are always interested in density, and so the question on that may come down to, are we willing to get more open space or whatever it is in exchange for more density? And that's not a simple question. But that may be the incentive that's appropriate if some of the smaller incentives aren't going to play out well.
This is Michael Torres. We, I guess recently, a couple of years ago, established the St. Simon's Island tree ordinance, and they tried to put in a 25% open space requirement and got quite a bit of lashback from the community. I think what ended up being accepted was, a certain amount of space around each required tree. I think currently it's 12 large canopy trees per acre, per development acre, which I think kind of works. It's poorly worded, but I think maybe trying to incorporate the open space into the tree ordinance might be a good option like we have now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea, and brings up another level of complexity with the open space, which is that because there are buffers and tree requirements, and inevitably there's going to be some natural areas. Just being in the area you are, there's a lot of properties that will have a stream setback or a wetland or a marshland or something, and so open space sometimes is just a fallback to say that if you don't have any of those, you've got to provide some open space, but if you already have those, they count toward open space. So there's multiple, if the issue is preserving green space, there's a lot of different ways to get there.
This is Sherry Gibbs, and in this same area where we're talking about open space and potential solution B, I would encourage you, where you're talking about counting double toward a particular requirement, you need, in my opinion, you need to remove this language about giving the land to the land trust. I think that's a decision that people can make on their own, but I think that could be problematic for some people that we're defining giving land to the land trust in these documents. Getting credit for giving it to the land trust. I mean, they already get some type of credit, but I just would like to see that language removed.
Would you be okay if it was one of options, if we said you can get double open space credit if you do one of these 5 things and one of them was the land trust?
This is Commissioner Kate. I'm with Commissioner Gibbs on that one. I think it's probably not appropriate. Is that what you're trying to say, Commissioner Gibbs?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's not appropriate.
We can update this to not reference that particular organization, because it would be highly unusual to actually say an entity.
Right.
There are many conservation entities that could possibly do that. So I like the idea of taking out the specific land trust just to avoid further complicating the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that, Caleb. This is Commissioner Edgy. The words land trust are it's not it's a point of a contention in some circles these days.
But I think you could say conservation easement or something like that instead, make it generic.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah, Michael Torres, I agree with George. It's a good intention, but maybe specifically calling it the land trust is not the best idea.
Okay. Any other thoughts on open space? All right, historic buildings, and I haven't mentioned, but almost all of these go back to the Envision Glynn plan, to the comprehensive plan. So that's sort of where we got our to-do list and drawing from that. Option A would be adopting the state model historic preservation ordinance and sort of implementing the results of the county historic resources survey report. Option B would not be creating full historic districts, but having some sort of historic preservation incentives or requirements. Option C is using transfer of development rights to help preserve historic buildings. And option D would be to keep things as they are and not have any historic preservation standards.
Commissioner Kate, I absolutely think we need to have some sort of historic preservation standards. And unfortunately, we've lost some of the historical landmarks in the past few years because we did not have anything protected, and to protect them.
This is Missy New. I have a question. So, and Joel may recall this, and because I may be getting this wrong, but when they created the historic district in downtown Brunswick and did an overlay, I recall that all the homeowners or property owners that it impacted got to vote on it. And I don't really remember what kind of vote it was, if it was, in a meeting or if they actually had ballots. But before, their properties that they paid for and had, intentions to use in a certain way were going to be restricted, they had, I don't remember if it was 50%. I don't remember what it was, but what are you going to do if this is going to be part of this to ensure that every property owner that is going to be impacted by it knows they're going to be impacted by it, how it's going to impact them, and that they get to have a voice? Because it's not going to be a geographic area. I mean, it could be the villages. There's going to be individual structures wherever that are going to be impacted, and they don't even know they're going to be. I mean, or what's be normal, I guess? Is it to be normal, they'd all be identified before the passage of the new regulations, so property can be used, let their impact.
Someone's got an echo and I can't fully hear, but if there were historic districts that were created, that would have to be separate from the zoning update process and afterwards. So the question in solution A is, should we create that possibility? Because today the code isn't set up to allow historic districts.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. Brunswick used the model ordinance, which is addressed in A. A lot of jurisdictions find that they don't want to have to go through that process of working with SHPO and working with the state. And that's what B is intended to address, more of a lighter approach to preservation that would still have teeth, but would not be as complicated as following the state ordinance. All of these would require a bunch of conversations, and as noted earlier, a lot of advantages and disadvantages that we would want to discuss with all the public, including affected property owners, before making a final recommendation.
This is Joe. I don't really like the idea of a district like this. I mean, it would be haphazard on St. Simon's. I've got 2 historic buildings at Epworth, and I certainly don't want to come under some type of ordinance. I mean, we're going to preserve them as long as we're able to do it, but if we have to take a building down, I want to be able to take a building down, but I think it puts too much burden on the homeowner or the property owner. And
if we're going to do it
on Island, you've got Christ Church, and you've got I don't know, some ruins on the island, but most of the times these things are pretty much preserved. So I think we can get in the weeds on this one pretty quick.
If we're going to do anything with this, we just have to remember that old doesn't equal historic.
Yeah, and that's why you all are very fortunate to have this report, which is a great report and lays out what the truly historic districts and buildings are. So that's a great starting point, which doesn't mean all of those are priorities for preservation, but it's a really good document.
This is Commissioner Kate. And I was referring really to landmarks more so than historic districts. I just recall one incident where there's a state sign along the side of the road, saying that within this land there is a graveyard, so to speak, for the McIntosh family. Well, then we had an application that came in and they were putting homes on top of these graves. And that's really where I'm coming from on this one. And that was not the only incident where something historic was basically just being erased.
Mm-hmm. So are we okay keeping these solutions on the table for further discussion, and we just need to kind of figure out how they would work or where they would apply?
Yes.
Okay. Buffers, this is getting a little technical. There's a lot of types of buffers today. So some of this is at sort of simplifying that, but as you do that, you have to talk about what the buffer requirements are. So this will definitely be easier when they're graphics, but 7 is looking at buffers. 8, fences and walls. There's some height restrictions today, but not a lot of other things going on. So these options are looking at providing height restrictions everywhere and looking at fence and wall materials, requiring building permits for taller fences and walls. So those are, I know, definitely subject to more discussion, but any thoughts on 7 or 8?
This is Commissioner Kate. I've actually had several emails from people, and I know that Commissioner Murphy did as well, because we discussed it on fences, and people desiring a fencing ordinance.
Mhm.
So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and it's a good point. If it's a specific commission district, I mentioned for any of these, we could decide to have regulations. Maybe somewhere we decide there's no fence regulations needed at all, and other areas that would have certain regulations. So
I think we've had a number of concerns on the island about fence height, and I don't think it would be too unreasonable to put a limit on fence height without a permit.
Mhm.
Because we got some folks that are building fortress type fences, and they're just not suitable for a family neighborhood.
Mhm.
And one of the situations was structurally, this one lot owner had built a fence that if the winds were strong enough, it would fall on the neighboring lots land, and it would destroy things on their lot. And I think they had issues with each other, so it might have been done
I
intentionally.
see.
But I think there needs to be some guidelines there too, structurally.
Yeah,
Along
and
the lines, I agree.
that was what was behind 8D, was getting at just sort of requiring a building permit if you've got a really substantial fence or wall, so that those sort of issues would be looked at.
This is Joel. I think, commercial should have a height where you can go higher, and a residential have a maximum height. So whatever those height numbers are, but I think certainly a commercial facility should have a higher fence, especially if they're backing up to a residential area.
Yeah, we've definitely seen communities that do that, and industrial is a lot higher, and sometimes agricultural is exempt, and there's a lot of ways to write that, but certainly not a single standard for everybody. All right. Signs. So this is another enormous one that I don't even know if these little bullets communicate very well, but option A is basically look at all of this stuff countywide in the sign ordinance. Option B is look at all of this stuff, but maybe focus in more on certain areas, commercial corridors or whatever. And option C is keep things like they are. So I'm sure there will be a lot of thoughts on that, but we wanted to just kind of have that in there. And again, I don't think at the next meeting we're going to get into, is the sign 8 feet or 10 feet tall, because we're not there yet, but just kind of talking generally, are these the kind of things that should be regulated? What's appropriate?
Well, Commissioner Pate, I think for the record, we should remove on 8 and 9 the no change potential solutions. I think we're all in agreement that those two, we definitely need some type of change.
We might keep the no change if only for the public, so they have that option when we present these options, because some people, either on specific issues for specific reasons, or people who on principle feel uncomfortable with regulations, like to have that option. So it is helpful for us to know if people don't support anything about this, about a specific thing. So some of them don't have no change because they're really technical or something has to happen, but on some of the policy questions, it might be better for us to keep no change if only so we can capture that percentage of the population.
This Gene Lee, I agree. Always no change should be an option.
Woody, this is Missy again. So on I agree that the sign regulations are complicated and different and everything from real signage to real estate signage. But so if this is changed, how do you handle existing businesses signage when they need to replace or improve that? Will they have to adhere to the new regulation? Will they get to keep their current size? How will that happen?
That's something we would have to think about, and grandfathering provisions are something that's going to apply to all of these, and there's some flexibility in there in terms of how you require when they apply with new things, with renovations or repairs, with things that are destroyed by natural disasters. So it's something we need to think about.
Yeah, I think that's tricky. If I was a business owner, I'd be able to keep my signage. If I'm a new business owner, is it fair they get to have bigger signage for the
Yeah.
I think we need to think really hard how significant this is changed in terms of size, illumination, and all of that. This is cleaning it all up, making it a little more across the board.
Yeah, and making sure that it's fair. If there was an area that had a big change in proposed signs, whether that was a lot more regulation or a lot less regulation, and that was different than what was already on the ground from the neighbors, then that could create some issues. So yeah, something we need to think about.
And Woody, I think the commissioner has a great point for all of these. We probably, before we finalize this for the public, want to have some language up front that at least talks about all of these questions relating to issues of nonconformity.
Right.
And how that affects previous or existing versus new, because I think all of these ideas are going to have different impacts on existing versus new construction.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Option 10 is about pervious pavement, just changing some things that would allow more pervious pavement or encourage it a little bit. Site coverage, sort of related. There are some zoning districts that talk about site coverage, but not everywhere. And that's just one tool that you could have. Again, you have buffers and other requirements, but one tool that you could use that would help with open space and stormwater runoff and several different aspects. Number 12, neighborhood retail is kind of allowed, but the same districts that allow that also allow strip malls. So maybe create a neighborhood commercial zoning district to be available for people who wanted it. And then reverse frontage, which is a technical planning term, but it basically means where the backyards of houses face the main road, which is fine in some areas. But are there certain areas, walkable areas, that we would want to prohibit that?
Woody, I'm sorry, this is Missy. Can I add something about site coverage? I think that we need to be, because this issue came up, I don't remember how long ago it was, And the public was, yes, we want site coverage limits until they figured out it applied to the existing developed property. So I think this question, the question is to include what is for new developments only, that any new developments would have site coverage limitations versus already platted and approved subdivisions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And where we've done these before, we've actually gone and measured on property records, aerial photos, existing lots, because sometimes people think, this regulation would be great sort of in an ideal world, and you look at a historic house or something and realize that what you have is already a lot more dense than that or something. So we would want to make sure that we're being realistic or have different standards for different areas or a different standard for new developments versus someone trying to put in a driveway or a new garage or something. But yeah, that's a good point. And what are those numbers is the other question. Are they strict or are they minimal? So.
Right, and a lot of people have paid extra for properties that have room for pools that when the last time it was proposed, there would be no pools. So they need to understand what it's going to impact to be able to give a good answer, I think.
Well, and are these residential or non-residential? A lot of these are just really big questions of where they apply. So a lot to keep in mind. All right. So the next section, these are procedural and admin things. So some of these get a little more technical. Number 14, y'all have a lot of zoning districts, and some of them are really similar. So one idea is just to consolidate those. There's a couple of different ways that could happen, but would help simplify that. Number 15.
Woody, this is Commissioner Edgy. Before we get into this next section, I think we need to revisit Commissioner Willis's suggestion that we all take some time and go through these things and provide a response. To his point, we've now been at this an hour and 22 minutes, and we're less than a third of the way finished. And I don't know that all of us thought that we were going to go into this much detail with each one of these line items tonight. And if I'm in the minority and everybody wants to continue going, I'm all for this. But I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. It's now approaching 7:30, and like I said, we've still got 2/3 of this document to go through.
Bill, it's George. I agree with both you and Joel about getting everybody having a chance to look at these in more detail, but I personally get value out of having this conversation and hearing what the other planning commission members have to say. Everybody's coming with a different set of experiences, and I would hate to rely exclusively on what people submit in writing. I'd like to suggest that what Joel suggested be done, people submit it in writing, but we continue this process after everybody's had a chance to do that so that we can continue the dialogue.
Oh, no, I agree with the dialogue, George. I just meant, because at this rate, we're taking this thing to midnight.
But one thing about this, Commissioner Strickland, we don't have to do this in one meeting also, right, Woody? We can spread this out over several meetings. And I don't think that was ever the point that we were going to do this all in one night, was it?
I think we just wanted to start the conversation and see how it was going. So yeah, we can spread it into multiple meetings. We would need to just understand that would be pushing the public meeting back a little bit. And
well, we've already had to adjust the timeline as it is. And I agree with George. I think having this open dialogue with all of the planning commissioners is a good thing.
This is Michael Torres. I think the more we can hash out amongst ourselves before it gets to the public, the easier all of our lives will be.
Absolutely.
Well, I was intention of having multiple meetings on this. I think that if each commissioner spends a little time going through each one and thinks about this, that will help us when we get back and have some more dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suggesting that our opinions that we send in are is going to be what's going to be printed, but at least it helps us, I think, educate us a little bit more. But then when we have the dialogue, it just opens up something else that maybe we'd be able to say, yeah, that's a good thing, let's go, you know, and,
Mhm.
right now, I think we're all thinking about each one as they come up, and it just delays everything in a way.
Yeah.
So I think if we go through this, send them in, you by a certain date, and then have another meeting soon after that, and hash out some more. I think this is going to take, this is going to be taking several meetings. It's not going to be 2 or 3. I think it's going to take more than that once we get it ready for the public.
This is Sherry Gibbs, and I agree with what all of you were saying. And, you know, George sent us a copy of everything he did. We all have email, and we can share our information with each other before we have a next meeting.
Mhm. I was gonna ask too, the way we put the policy questions into a survey for the commissioners, we could do the same with this information. You know, it'd be verbatim what we're looking at on screen now, but it would basically have a checkbox and a comment box for each of these to say, you know, number 14, solution A, do you think this is something we need to keep discussing as it is, remove, add something to it, edit, and what are your comments? And that way there would be sort of a standard form. We could compile all those and share them with all the commissioners and then discuss them after that together. So it would be kind of one, everyone could go to the same Google form or whatever we set up. Is that helpful?
Woody, it's George. My only comment about the commissioner survey was that what you put in front of them was pretty binary. It was either keep working on it or not. And what I found in reading through these is that these are not binary solutions. In a lot of cases, what I think is the right thing is a combination of 1 or 2 or 3 of what's there, and it's going to be hard to pick that up on a survey.
Well, but again, we're not to the point yet of what, which of these are the right solutions or which combination of them, but which solutions need to be on the table. So I was wondering if there would be a way to, you know, for each A, B, and C have an option that says keep on the table as is, take it off the table, edit it, add something, and then a space for, again, each of the sub items for comments, so that it would be more open-ended than what we did with the commissioners.
But I think, George.
Let's move on and see where we get.
I was gonna say, I think George's idea of having, I think there's a value that maybe we might end up combining solutions or tweaking them. So I think, Woody, that I'm not opposed to having this as open-ended as possible.
Okay.
Because, you know, commissions are really our sounding board in this case. And if we can get those options as close to what we think is a well-vetted list, I would like to use the time and the opportunity to do that.
So then is it better to just keep this as a Word document and have everyone comment on it and provide a deadline?
I mean, I think you could, or if you wanted to put it into an Excel format, I think there always needs to be the option to add or adjust what's above.
Yeah, I think for each thing, there should be an option to edit that.
Yeah.
Or combine or whatever it is.
Let's move on as quickly as possible, see how far we get.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll use this time well and know that we're going to have a more detailed chance to look into this.
So this is Michael Torres. With the moving on in mind, which I'm all in favor for, do we want to set a cutoff time just so everybody knows when we'll be finished, or just want to keep it going until someone's exhausted?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock sounds reasonable to me, and we'll see where we are then.
Works for me.
All right, before we get to 8 o'clock, let's set the end of the month. How about the end of May to get the comments back in? Does that work? From all the commissioners?
Works for me.
That was Michael Torres. That would work for me, but Woody, how far back would that push our schedule? I don't want to put you guys out too much either.
If that's 2 weeks, I guess, till the end of the month, and then if we were able in the meantime to schedule the next special called meeting and, could have that soon after early June and could get through everything in that meeting, then I don't think it would push things back more than 2 or 3 weeks. If it took us a month to schedule that meeting, because I know sometimes schedules are a challenge, or we needed a third special called meeting, then it might push things back a month or two.
Well, I think that's going to happen because I don't think you're going to have the ability to have a large gathering, a public hearing or a public comment period where the public can come and ask questions. So I think we're looking at later in the latter part of the summer for that to happen.
Well, the public meeting would certainly not be a large gathering, and there could be multiple ways to do that, whether that's entirely online as a sort of drop-in, the information's available, or maybe there's a central location that has limited capacity and is open for several weeks, and so it's just a drop-in. I think there's a way we can handle the public meeting if we, wanted to do that in June or July, and there's still concerns about health. There's ways to do that that would make people safe, but if we need extra time for the planning commission to meet before then, and that public meeting ends up being in the fall instead of the summer, then that's okay as well. I mean, we're anxious. We're significantly behind schedule, but we want to make sure that we have all the conversations we need to on this. So.
Well, let's go. Let's continue then until 8 o'clock.
Okay. So PD is a really big concern, and a lot of it is not going to be something we can address with the zoning text, just because those are things that were previously approved. So just some solutions that we're doing sort of within the confines of what we've got. Option A is requiring those developments to conform to the regulations as much as possible, especially for those that don't have site plan approvals or detailed approvals yet or are not built out yet. Option B is additional standards, whether those are physical standards or procedural standards that existing and future PDs would have to follow. C would be requiring all new PDs to be at least 100 acres or a certain size. Solution D would be actually rezoning some of the PDs to something else, which would solve some of the problem. There's a second solution D. I think we fixed that. I may not have sent out the latest draft that I'm looking at, but the second D is keeping PD on the books for properties that are zoned that way, but prohibiting it from being used in the future. And then E, no change. So again, I know there's a lot of specific concerns about specific PDs, but in terms of the zoning text and the zoning update process, these seemed like a decent array of solutions. So anything we missed here, or do these seem like a reasonable set of options?
Yeah, Commissioner Edgy, I think this covers the PD, especially in the mainland, is a concern. I think it's overused, and those of us that were part of the steering committee for the comprehensive plan saw this firsthand. I like the options you have listed here.
Okay. 16, there's not a true mixed use district today. There are some districts that allow different uses, but this would basically be creating a new zoning district that was on the books, that if a developer came along and wanted to do a more walkable or mixed use district, they would have something, have an option to rezone to. Number 17 is about rezoning notification. You have this requirement about them being mailed to property owners within 200 feet, which goes beyond the state law, but maybe misses some of the intent of that in terms of, transparency and notifying the broader community. So one option would be to remove that specific requirement, but just make things more accessible and sort of an online system. And that may be sort of beyond this effort and beyond the zoning update, but that was one idea that had occurred to us to make things more transparent but maybe not spelling it out as a specific rule, but option B would be keeping the requirement as it is.
This is Gene Lee. I disagree with removing the online notice. There are still folks who don't use the electronic media very well, but I think adding the electronic media and continuing the online is the proper way to go.
This is Sherry Gibbs, and I agree with Gene. That's exactly what I was about to say. I would like to see us continue what we're doing and add the online.
Okay, so so we could remove basically the first phrase from solution A, and just solution A would just say create an online system.
Correct. What I said is rather than say remove, I just said continue the requirement for notification by
Oh,
mail
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
and create an online system.
I agree with Missy, Gene Lee.
And just to be clear, that's a separate, that's not the requirement that notices be put in the paper. That's the specific mailing that goes to property owners within 200 feet, and that only applies to rezoning. So it doesn't apply to, you know, subdivision applications or variances or anything else.
Correct.
Okay. '18 site coverage variances. This gets pretty technical, and again, same order as the policy question. So these may not be in the most logical order because we talked about coverage a little earlier, but it's sort of weird. You can get a variance from the regulation in certain circumstances, but this a site coverage variance is prohibited from being applied for on the islands, which is a little odd. And then commercial lot coverage variances on the mainland only are approved by the Planning Commission, but all other types of variances are approved by the Board of Appeals. So I'm sure there's history to all of these, but it's pretty complicated today. So the options are us just saying, you know, spell out who approves what, and maybe making it a little more straightforward in terms of what can happen and who approves it.
It's Gene Lee with regard to the mainland. I'm in favor of option E with regard to the mainland planning commission.
So all certain types of variances would be decided by the Board of Appeals, and certain would be decided by the Planning Commission?
Yes.
I think the challenge from our perspective is just sort of what's the I don't know. I think it's worth discussing with the public, because I think from a developer perspective to say, if you need a variance, here's the path and it's the same for all variances, has some merits to it. But
Woody, how common is it throughout the state for requests for variance to be heard, the initial request for variance to be heard by the Planning Commission versus some other body?
I may let Caleb answer that.
It's pretty rare, quite frankly. Usually there's a Board of Appeals and they have authority over any variations, but you know, it is done in some places, as with Glynn. We've even seen some cities and counties where they actually have the full county commission or city council approve certain variances. So legally we can do whatever you want to do, whatever makes sense. What I'm always concerned about is making sure that the technical criteria are being properly adhered to, and that sometimes is a bigger issue than anything.
It's just, to me, the notion of having a Board of Appeals implies that they're appealing a decision that's already been made by somebody else. And if they're the place where a request for a variance is first presented, they're really not appealing anything. They're asking for a zoning variation, which to me is more parallel to a rezoning request than an appeal of anything.
And I think that language, Caleb can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that goes all the way back to the Zoning Enabling Act when zoning was invented and that entity being called a Board of Zoning Appeals, which is.
It can be called a Board of Adjustments, a Board of Appeals.
Yeah.
The main thing in my perspective is the body and the criteria.
But that's we could change the name if we wanted in the process, or change.
Well, what we also could do is maybe we create a new class of variation. I mean, some jurisdictions have an exception, a special exception.
Right.
That would be heard by a different party. And if this is not based on the usual size, shape, and topography, and the criteria are more related to consideration of the design and the context and the community, then I think legally we could not even call it a variance and call it something else.
The one thing I would say that really isn't here is if the variance requests are going to continue to be heard by a separate body like the Board of Zoning Appeals, those variance requests need to be heard and resolved before a plan that needs a variance is presented to the Planning Commission for approval.
Yeah, agreed. So we may need to think some to make sure that that process is spelled out in the right order.
Yeah,
Has the mainland ever heard of variant? Has the Mainland Planning Commission ever heard of variance on commercial site coverage?
I'm not aware of any since I've been with the county. This is Stephanie, but I'm not sure if others who have been commissioners for a longer time have ever heard one.
This is Gary Neville. I can't recall one either, and I've been on it since '02.
Okay. It's a pretty unique circumstance. So signed variances, and this is to your point, Caleb, are go to the county commission, and all the other variances except the ones we just talked about go to the Board of Appeals. This is one that correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, is this one that the county commissioners asked us not to change? So that's why it's the only option is no change?
Yeah, that was the feedback, was to keep it as it is, correct?
Okay. So number 20, subdivision approvals for non-residential subdivisions and residential subdivisions with 4 or fewer lots are decided administratively today. Option A would be basically, allow larger subdivisions to be approved administratively, and B would be requiring smaller ones to have to be approved by the commission, and C would be keeping that at 4 lots. Number 21, site plan review.
I have a comment on that. I think as far as Allen Planning Commission, I feel like the more power that we have, the better that we have control and the public sees our job of looking after them. So just for the record, I think we need to have more power, referring to number 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that applies to a lot of these as well. And I think ultimately that's going to come back to the, you saw we sort of had a specific line item for expanding the planning commission powers, and the county commission turned that down, which doesn't mean we can't change any of this, because there's obviously a lot of subtle points here, but we're going to have to work within that and just be careful what we ask for.
Well, I hope that when you have the public meetings, you'll share with the public those things that the commissioners said should be turned down, and get public comment on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we, in the interest of transparency, and because that has happened since our last public meeting, we will have something that says, here are all the policy questions, here's what happened with the commissioners, and these 3 are off the table, just for transparency. And
this Commissioner Kate, explanation of why they want our increased for the public.
I think that would have to come from the commissioners. They just said, asked us not to have the discussion about expanding the powers. So I don't think they're wanting them to be decreased or gave any specific reasons, but we could ask them if that's something they want to communicate at the open house. So site plan review, this is something I guess we heard about sort of talking to developers and stakeholders in the beginning, because it's required for even very small buildings and unenclosed buildings. Sometimes the planning commissions are seeing things that are not very big or have a lot to talk about. So option A would be create a threshold. I think we said 500 square feet, but that could be whatever was appropriate, below which a commercial building or an unenclosed building would not require review by the planning commission. And option B is just keeping things as they are.
This Gene Lee with Maine Planning Commission. I'm a big fan of solution A.
This is Commissioner Strickland. I agree with Gene. Sometimes the planning commission gets approval requests for things that could certainly be handled on the administrative level by community development. There's no reason for them to come before the planning commission.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Commissioner Strickland and Commissioner Lee, except that when anything that's subject to administrative review takes the public out of the process, there's no notification, there's no opportunity for public comment. And irrespective of the size, if it's going in next door to somebody, I think that they have the right to know what's going on and have the right to comment before it's approved.
Yeah, and that's where these tie back into the sort of public notice stuff. You know, one of our goals from the beginning has been making sure that we have the right transparency and the right discussion on things that need discussion, and there's going to be things that need a lot of discussion. But on the other side, have transparency, but remove the discussion or remove some of the red tape for things that don't merit that. So I think maybe these go in concert, that if there was a better system for it to be easy to find out if there's a whatever subdivision plat or something going on next door, then or a building less than 500 square feet, you know, whatever it is, that there could be less of a formal process because the information would still be accessible.
Yeah, I agree with George. I think there ought to be some opportunity for comment, especially on St. Simon's with small commercial development.
Okay, site plan approvals, number 22 is, again, us trying to untie the PD knot a little bit. It's challenging because the site plans actually already expire after 2 years, the way it's written today. So some of those older PDs that were already approved, those site plans are expired. So that may solve some of the problem, which is what would happen with option B, no change. Option A is keep that, but if there are these properties that are zone PD, not developed or not fully developed, and the site plans have expired, just have a county policy that those get rezoned after a certain amount of time, or zoned back to where they were.
So Woody, I have a question. This is Missy. So just so I understand, if that was to happen, so let's say we, God forbid, have another big economic downturn and plans are put on hold, I mean, is it just gonna happen and it just automatically gets rezoned? Will there be a process that the property owner will be involved and can, you know, appeal that before it's done? That would be my concern, is that there, you know, a lot of money is spent to create that, get that site plan approval, and there could be certainly, you know, hurricanes or economic downturn that really cause that delay.
Right, yeah. And you can't write it to be automatic. You can't say, you know, exactly 24 months after the date, it automatically becomes what the zoning was before. So what this would be from a zoning perspective is just a policy that says after 24 months, the planning director can examine the facts, and if they think it should be zoned to something different, they can present that to the planning commission and the county commission for review. So that way, if there is something that everyone agrees is no longer appropriate or things have really changed, they could change it. And if they say, no, it's a recession or hurricane, what you're saying, then it wouldn't, your hands aren't tied after 2 years, I guess. But it gives you another, we're just trying to give you tools to get out of the PD. I wish that we had an easy solution, but that's one more option to have.
I just think if you want the public to support that solution, you might want to add that to there, that there will be a process and that sort of thing, so that they understand those kind of circumstances would be examined before it happens.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, this is Michael Torres. I fully agree with Missy. We were in that exact situation. We had a PD text or a session hit, 5, 8 years later, we're trying to do it again. It's expired. The regulations hadn't changed. And it's definitely an issue we need to discuss.
Hey, Woody, Gary Neville, Mainland Planning Commission. I wouldn't mind having them the option of be able to file for an extension possibly for 2 more years for, situations like Missy had mentioned earlier. But as far as the PD text going away, no, maybe they have to go back through site plan approval is all. If it's, if there's no renewal of the previous one, extension of it like they do with certain subdivision preliminary plats.
Okay.
Yeah, and so just about if you get rid of their people tax, there's a lot of lender involvement in those plan development. That's the real issue of if just that take away because they start. I mean, it would have different to that lender, obviously.
Okay.
Hi, this is Patrick. I don't know if you can hear me. I agree with Gary's points. I think an extension would be a very reasonable process.
Okay, we can add that in.
Can we just do a time check here? Are we stopping at 8 o'clock or what was the plan?
We've got 2 more questions and 8 minutes. So if you think we can finish this section, that would put us right at 8 or maybe a few minutes after, if that's reasonable.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so 23 related to site plan review standards. That's giving to you as the planning commission. One is requiring, or A is requiring construction plans to be included in site plan applications to make sure you can sort of review the full design up front. We've heard about issues where that caused conflicts because you didn't have the information you needed. Option B is looking at establishing a threshold for traffic impact studies and requiring that information to be presented to the planning commission again, so you have everything on the table as you're making decisions, and of course the public would be able to see that at all as well. And then option C is no change. This isn't, I should say, there may be wording changes and other things that we need to make to the site plan review standards or things that fall under technical edits, but these were 2 of the sort of policy changes we wanted to throw out there.
Woody, Gary Neville, Mainland Planning Commission. I think most of us as planning commissioners, there are some exceptions, but probably aren't qualified to review construction plans or understand the nuances of drainage design and those formula and things like that. And as far as traffic study goes, I think upon recommendation of the staff, possibly, if they think they need it, but definitely it's something I know we've done and required on the mainland for before they got engineering plans approved.
I agree with Gary. I don't like the construction plan requirements up front. After the site plan, the construction plans could change. You're just approving a site plan. You're not really approving what's going to be inside and all that. So I don't like the idea of having those plans up front.
I know that bullet actually came from our discussion with planning commissioners, and I'm not sure if that was sort of one of our early one-on-ones or a bigger discussion, but my memory was that there had been projects that did not include stormwater facilities at all in the plan that was approved. Once they went through engineering, said, we need a big detention pond out front, and because it didn't come back to planning commission, there then was what got built was pretty different than what was approved. So I don't. My assumption there was that it's less about you all getting into the details of the engineering plan and more about the developer having done enough work by the time they come to you that you're approving the final design. Although obviously they're not at that point yet. So I don't know how to phrase that. If anyone remembers that previous conversation.
Well, I think there's a difference between approving the final engineering design and making sure that the engineering design concept works. We had, I remember one before I was on the planning commission, but I know one that came before the Island Planning Commission where they proposed an underground stormwater retention system that was going to be a gravity drain system, and nobody on the planning commission appropriately could figure out how in the world that was going to work, but it got approved with that. There needs to be a concept that works, whether it's designed to be in point A or point B on a site plan isn't the issue. For me, it's not anyway. It's whether the proposal that they're offering is something that's actually going to work.
It strikes me that we just need to be planners and not engineer checkers. We have staff people that are paid good money to do that job. There's a whole engineering group that have years and years of experience. And I think we've got to learn to trust the staff, and staff has to deliver what they're supposed to do.
Patrick, I'm not arguing with you. I was suggesting, though, that ought to take place before it comes to us, so that when we've got something, staff is weighing in on whether the concept that's on that site plan will work or not. And right now, I don't think they do that.
Well, I think on that particular project, that was Hotel Simone that proposed an underground retention.
Yeah, it was Pilar at the time.
Yeah, and I think we approved that, and because based on engineering studies on it. So as far as I know, it's working.
This Gene Lee, there's a
gravity
huge
system.
difference. This Gene Lee, there's a huge difference between site plan and construction plans. And when we start getting into minutia of construction plans as far as approval, I think we might be overstepping our bounds a little bit.
This is Carla Kate. I just our last meeting, guys, where there was an issue. If we had seen the construction plan about the pool, he had given a pool permit. There was some back and forth with his construction plans. I mean, that's one incident where it would have helped us to see the whole picture. What do you guys think about that?
We couldn't understand you, Carla.
Hans, I couldn't understand you either, Carla.
I
Much of an
think
echo.
if everybody turn their mic off, maybe. Can you hear me better?
Yep.
Okay, I think it's when there's a lot of mics on. I was referring to our last meeting. We had an issue with a pool where initially staff had given him a pool permit. Then there was confusion back and forth with his construction plans. The pool was on it, and then it wasn't. He had the building permit, he had the permit, and he didn't. That's one incident where I think, had we seen the whole picture, we might have understood it better. I was asking my fellow commissioners what they thought. IPC.
This is Missy. My issue is just that's a huge expense on a project you may not even the site plan may not just think that's a huge expense to ask people to outlay, especially on something that is not straightforward or is controversial due to neighbors or that sort of thing. I think that's a huge expense to have all those plans done.
How would the commissioners feel if we reworded to say require a statement addressing how the project would conform to stormwater facilities or something like that? That is more common, and it doesn't require you to spend $50,000 to $60,000 to actually do plans before you have permits. But you have to think, okay, am I going to do underground? Am I going to do a retention pond or a detention area? We just want people to think about it before they come to you for site plan approval.
Caleb, we have that now.
Okay, so.
So maybe, you know, we're hearing several different opinions, but maybe we don't need we need to make sure developers are following what's there and the staff is helping planning commissions understand everything they need to, but we could remove the idea of this requiring construction plans.
I definitely support that.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agree.
Okay, and if anyone has any, ideas of how to do that better or handle that, let us know. And then I guess the question is also the same for B. The one reason to have a specific threshold for traffic studies in the code is that it's black and white, that a developer can tell whether or not they're going to need one. But if that is too specific, and it's better to just say the staff can require them when they're merited or something like that, then we could do that as well. Any thoughts on that, or should we keep B as is?
I like that suggestion, Gene Lee.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Said I agree with you.
Okay.
This is Missy. I think anything that's subjective just needs to make sure it has some general guidelines for when the staff can ask for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then our last one here, 24 engineering standards. There is some flexibility in your existing standards to use what's called light impact drainage practices, which is less of the conventional stuff and more things that work with nature. But these options just look at maybe being more specific about what is allowed or even encouraging some of those so that developers know what the options are out there. And then 24 is closing a gap in existing requirements that allows stormwater to be drained right into the marsh. So that would require some sort of treatment before it was drained into the marsh. So any thoughts on 24? All right. And I'm sorry, this just update, the D was just updating the stormwater ordinances to match the model ordinances. So that was good. We made it through half the document, and I know there's a lot more, but I feel good about that discussion. So it sounds like we can talk with the county staff about the best way to get input. So maybe if you all want to hold off a little bit on your comments on these just until we figure out whether we're doing a survey or exactly how we want to collect that. And I know a couple of you have already submitted comments, but we can figure that out, and then we'll get that back to you soon. And then it sounded like a end of the month deadline might be reasonable for comments, and then we can figure out what our in-person options look like after that. Does that sound reasonable, or any other comments?
Yeah, this is Stephanie. I think that sounds good, Woody. We'll just discuss the best way to get those questions out and just the best way to get the feedback. So maybe kind of a hybrid approach or combination, so people have some choices on how they want to get that feedback back to us. But yeah, we'll look at some dates on that. We'll be back in touch with the commissioners to let you know.
Woody, Richard Strickland, are we going to go ahead and between you and the staff, are y'all going to set up a timeline for the next meeting for the planning commissioners?
Yes, this is Stephanie. Yeah, I think between TSW and staff, we can talk about our availability and then get back in touch and do a poll with everyone to see what dates might work. I guess a question for everyone, if you want to let us know now, how are you feeling about this virtual platform? Do you feel like we could do this again to finish up the rest of the questions and gather again virtually? Or do you think it's better to wait till we can meet in person?
I think we can do this virtually.
Yeah, this is Bill Edgy. I see this as a very good and productive format.
Gene, I think we can finish this virtually.
This is Michael Torres. I know my wife would appreciate me finishing it virtually as well.
Well, Steffi, the way it's set up right now, the county is not going to start having meetings again as far as the planning commissioners and the citizens and everything till June. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. For the remainder of May, we are going to be doing all our meetings virtually, but starting in June, we will start having the in-person public meetings again. We will still try to do, as much work as we can virtually, but in terms of our actual planning commission meetings, we will be back to in-person meetings in June.
Well, if we're going to continue to do virtual meeting, if we're going to do another virtual meeting, then it'll have to be scheduled within the next 2 weeks or so, because we're coming up, this is the middle of May.
Yeah, Woody, how would you all feel about trying to get something, a second virtual meeting scheduled in the next couple weeks? Basically, I think what that would mean is potentially we wait to get the feedback on all the questions, do our second virtual meeting, and then set out the date on when we want the feedback on all the questions.
Yeah, or Stephanie, we could ask for feedback on the ones that we haven't talked about yet too, if we wanted to give the commissioner sort of a two-phase work list. That may be useful, but we're completely flexible to do whatever schedule you need us to do.
This is Michael Torres. Just because we start our in-person meetings again does not mean we have to completely abandon the virtual meetings either. So it is an option to have virtual meetings in June as well as in-person meetings.
Good
Yeah, I think
suggestion.
that's a very good point.
Well, let's maybe
again.
we'll start thinking tomorrow about whatever way to get the engagement, and Stephanie can send a poll for dates, and we'll kind of see how that goes and see when the dates line up. If we can get a date that is 2 weeks out for our next virtual meeting, and that gives everyone time to do our form, fill it out or whatever, and we can get all the way through it and finish talking about the second half, that might work. And if we need to push back a little more, have 2 meetings, we could do that too, or just see where everyone stands.
That's good.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, Woody, Caleb, and Stephanie, we appreciate you guys doing this. Thank you for all of this feedback. We will hopefully everyone can complete their comments by the end of May as discussed. And Stephanie, I guess we'll look to you to send out either a doodle poll or talk to us about scheduling the next meeting.
Great.
Yes, sir. Yep. We'll be back in touch via email with some different options and some dates.
Okay.
Thanks to Janet too.
Oh, absolutely, Janet. Thank you very much, always. Okay, is there anything else that we need to cover?
Bill, we don't need to cover. I just want to ask Stephanie a question. This is Joel. Stephanie, when will our packets be out for our meeting for next week?
Sure. Your Island Planning Commission packets for your May 19th meeting, they will be going out tomorrow. We are looking to do electronic version since it is only one item that's going to be on your agenda. It's the deferred application from your last meeting in April. So we're going to send that out electronically tomorrow. And then if anybody wants a hard copy, we will get one to you.
All right. I'll also send out the project list for George. He wants that. Right, George?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Joel.
Okay.
I'll make a note right now.
Yeah, all right.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.